Melcom Emel, BRA decoded. Today we're going to expose T-bar AM has topapar aframars dop warrantomwao yuto kanawu. Not mysticism, not motivational fluff, but precise biology first strategies you can use today to change how you perform, learn, and produce. If you watch closely, I'll give you exact actions, when to do them and why they work, so you can start rerouting your brain toward high performance immediately. Your biology is always running in the background, governing your energy, your focus, your motivation, and even your emotional resilience. And one of the biggest misconceptions people carry is the belief that mindset drives biology. In reality, biology drives mindset. When your internal systems are aligned, the mind naturally follows. When they're misaligned, no amount of motivation or positive thinking can compensate. So, mastering your biology isn't optional. It's the foundation for every cognitive and behavioral change you want to make. When you look at high performers across any field, athletes, entrepreneurs, researchers, artists, you notice something consistent. They don't start with strategy or discipline. They start with regulating the systems that determine how their brain functions hour by hour. They understand that the brain isn't floating in isolation. It's wired into light exposure, nutrition, sleep architecture, hormone rhythms, physical activity, and internal chemistry. When those rhythms are tuned properly, the brain operates at a level most people never experience. And when they're not, the brain becomes reactive, foggy, impulsive, or easily fatigued. One of the first levers to control is your circadian system, the 24-hour rhythm that dictates alertness, hormone release, temperature regulation, and metabolic processes. The quickest way to recalibrate this system is light, especially morning light. When you expose your eyes to natural sunlight early in the day, you trigger a cascade of biological signals, activation of cortisol release, increased dopamine tone, improved metabolic readiness, enhanced focus, and an anchored sleep-wake cycle. This isn't psychological. It's biochemical. Your entire day becomes more structured simply because you gave your cells the signal that wakefulness begins now. A movement is another essential pillar, not for burning calories, but for its ability to modify brain chemistry. Even a few minutes of early day physical activity increases catecholamines, dopamine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, which are responsible for alertness and elevated cognitive performance. This is why a short, brisk walk or a light exercise session early in the day can transform your mental clarity. The brain evolved in a body that moved. When you move, the brain flips into a mode designed for problem solving and focused action. Breathing is a third lever, one people dramatically underestimate. Your breath is the fastest way to adjust your autonomic state. When you lengthen your exhales, you shift toward parasympathetic dominance, calm, control, and reduced internal noise. When you use deliberate inhales or cyclic breathing, you shift toward sympathetic activation. Focus, readiness, heightened alertness. PANS. The fact that a few breaths can alter your brain's internal environment is not a metaphor, it's a physiological reality. And anyone who learns to use this tool can regulate their state far more effectively than those who rely on willpower alone. Nutrition plays a role as well, not in an abstract eat healthy sense, but in understanding how glucose, amino acids, and micronutrients influence mental performance. When your blood sugar is crashing or spiking, your cognition is unstable. When you're dehydrated, your neural conduction slows. When you're deficient in key minerals, your neurotransmitter systems falter. You can want focus, discipline, or motivation with every ounce of your mind, but if the biological substrates that support those states aren't present, your brain simply won't deliver them. Sleep is arguably the master controller of all these systems. High performers are not perfect sleepers, they're consistent sleepers. They protect the timing of sleep because timing determines dopamine replenishment, memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and the ability to sustain effort throughout the day. When your sleep is stable, your cognitive output rises automatically. When your sleep is irregular, everything from mood to learning to decision making becomes compromised. Another crucial aspect of mastering your biology is understanding how stress and recovery interact. Stress isn't the enemy. It's the signal that tells your system to adapt and strengthen. But stress without recovery becomes inflammation, burnout, and cognitive decline. This is why structured recovery, breathwork, light exposure, deliberate rest, low-intensity movement is as important as the moments of high effort. Your biology operates in cycles: activation, exertion, recovery, consolidation. Break the cycle and performance drops. Honor it and performance compounds. Ultimately, mastering your biology is a process of aligning your internal environment with the outcomes you want. Focus isn't a gift, it's a state created by chemistry. Motivation isn't luck, it's a reflection of dopamine availability and metabolic readiness. Calmness isn't a personality trait, it's a physiological condition you can train. When you start with biology, everything else, your habits, your mindset, your productivity, becomes dramatically easier. Most people try to change their lives from the top down through goals, willpower, or inspiration. But the individuals who consistently operate at high levels go bottom up. They adjust the physiological levers that determine how their brain functions, and then their mindset, discipline, and decision-making emerge naturally. When you master your biology, you stop fighting your brain and start partnering with it. And that's when levels of performance and clarity you once thought were rare become your everyday baseline. Your brain isn't designed to operate at one steady level of focus throughout the day. It runs on biological rhythms, waves of alertness, dips in energy, peaks in creativity, and windows of deep focus that follow predictable, measurable cycles. When you learn to work with these rhythms instead of against them, you unlock a level of cognitive performance that feels smoother, more sustainable, and far more effective than trying to grind through hours of constant effort. High performers don't rely on discipline alone, they align effort with the natural timing of the brain. One of the most important patterns is the ultradian rhythm, cycles of roughly 90 minutes where focus, alertness, and neural resources rise and fall. During the first part of the cycle, your brain naturally increases in dopamine and norepinephrine, the chemicals responsible for attention and goal-directed behavior. This is when you feel most capable of deep work, solving complex problems, learning new material, or performing tasks that require precision. But after 60 to 90 minutes, there is an inevitable drop. Your brain begins shifting into a state that favors rest and recovery, reducing your capacity to maintain high-level thinking. Most people fight this dip with caffeine, phone interruptions, or sheer willpower. But when you push through the end of a cycle, your productivity plummets and your brain becomes less efficient over time. Instead, you want to synchronize your hardest work with the rise of an ultradian cycle, then pause, not quit when the cycle ends. A short recovery window of even 10 to 20 minutes is enough to reset neural chemicals and prepare the brain for another productive period. During this recovery phase, movement, hydration, exposure to natural light, or slow, deliberate breathing can accelerate the reset. This isn't wasting time. This is restoring the internal resources that allow you to maintain peak performance across the day. And then there's the larger circadian rhythm, the 24-hour cycle that governs your overall alertness patterns. Most people experience their first major wave of high focus in the morning, roughly 90 to 120 minutes after waking, when cortisol is elevated and body temperature starts to rise. This window is ideal for your most demanding cognitive tasks. Another peak often occurs in the early afternoon, while late afternoon may favor physical performance due to elevated body temperature and better muscular coordination. When you understand these patterns, you stop scheduling your day around convenience and start scheduling it around biological timing. There's also a rhythm to how your brain processes different types of tasks. For instance, analytical thinking, problem solving, and technical detail work thrive in states of high alertness when your brain is bathed in catecholamines. But creativity often emerges in the dips when your mind is more relaxed and lateral connections form more easily. This is why people often get their best ideas in the shower, during a walk, or while doing something non-demanding. If you force creativity during a high pressure focus window, you may get stuck. But if you assign creative exploration to a lower energy state, you harness the brain's natural mode for divergent thinking. Sleep also plays a massive role in sustaining these rhythms. During certain phases of sleep, like slow wave and REM, your brain consolidates memories, strengthens neural circuits, and prepares itself for the next day's cycles of alertness. When your sleep timing is inconsistent, your ultradian and circadian rhythms drift, creating uneven energy, unpredictable focus, and irregular motivation. Stable sleep patterns anchor these rhythms so your daily peaks become reliable. There's a deep advantage in recognizing that your body temperature follows a predictable pattern as well. As your core temperature rises throughout the day, cognitive performance improves. As it lowers, your brain shifts toward relaxation and ultimately sleep. If you want to extend alertness temporarily, increasing body temperature through light exercise, a brisk walk, or even a brief cold exposure can shift you into a more focused state. Likewise, to prepare for winding down, dimming lights, and avoiding stimulants helps lower temperature and signal your brain to transition toward rest. Ultimately, using your brain's rhythms means respecting that your internal systems are dynamic, not linear. You cannot expect consistent, unbroken focus any more than you can expect a muscle to contract indefinitely without rest. By timing deep work with ultradian peaks, placing creative tasks in natural dips, structuring your day around circadian highs, and protecting sleep as the foundation for all rhythms, you create a cognitive environment where your brain operates at its highest capability, without burnout, without forcing it, and without wasted energy. You begin to feel like your brain is working with you, not resisting you. That's the power of aligning your life with your biology. Motivation is not a mysterious force that appears when you feel inspired. It's a biological process driven by timing, chemistry, and how your brain learns to associate effort with reward. Most people misunderstand motivation because they think it's supposed to precede action. In reality, motivation is something you create through action and shape through strategic reward timing. When you understand this mechanism, you stop relying on emotional highs and start building a system where your brain naturally pushes you toward the behaviors you want. At the core of motivation is dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for drive, anticipation, and the willingness to exert effort. But dopamine is not released randomly. It follows a highly predictable pattern. It spikes in response to rewards, but more importantly, it spikes in anticipation of rewards. This distinction is critical. If you consistently reward yourself after effort, you teach your brain that effort predicts pleasure. If you reward yourself before effort, you sabotage motivation because the brain already received its dopamine hit without doing anything meaningful. High performers understand this intuitively. They don't use rewards as escapes. They use them as reinforcers. The key is pairing reward with progress, not procrastination. When you complete a focus block, finish a workout set, or hit a learning milestone, that is when you attach a small, deliberate reward. It doesn't need to be something big, your favorite tea, a quick walk in the sun, a relaxing 5-minute break, or a pleasurable activity you enjoy. The reward acts as a signal to the brain. This behavior is valuable. Do it again. Over time, your dopamine system becomes anchored not to the reward itself, but to the effort that precedes it. You start craving the work because the brain knows reward follows. This is where timing becomes powerful. If you give yourself large, frequent rewards without effort, your baseline dopamine drops, making motivation harder to access. This is the trap many people fall into: constant scrolling, continuous entertainment, endless novelty. These things deliver dopamine without requiring any challenge, which trains the brain to avoid hard tasks. But when rewards are strategically timed after effort, the opposite happens. The brain amplifies motivation and increases resilience to discomfort. There's also value in using micro rewards during longer tasks. For example, if you're working through a difficult project, breaking it into smaller pieces and giving yourself a small reward after each completed piece keeps motivation alive. Your brain loves measurable progress. Each micro win signals that you're moving forward, and every signal increases dopamine tone just enough to sustain effort. This is how people maintain discipline without feeling drained. They create a rhythm of effort, progress, and reward. Another dimension of shaping motivation is learning how to reduce reliance on external rewards over time. In the beginning, external rewards, like a treat, a break, or a pleasurable activity, are very useful. But the long-term goal is to make the process itself rewarding. This happens through a shift known as internalization, where your brain begins releasing dopamine during the work itself because it has been conditioned to expect eventual satisfaction. This is how people become addicted to progress, learning, training, or building something meaningful. Their brain associates the challenge with the reward, so the act of doing becomes pleasurable. One technique that strengthens this internal shift is self-directed reinforcement. When you acknowledge progress, even silently, you create a subtle dopamine rise. Something as simple as telling yourself, "This is working," or "I'm getting closer," reinforces the behavior neurologically. It might sound small, but internal dialogue has measurable effects on dopamine pathways. The brain listens to what you repeat. Another critical factor is avoiding dopamine stacking, combining multiple pleasurable stimuli at once. For example, working while constantly snacking, multitasking with notifications, or listening to overly stimulating music can make the task feel rewarding artificially. But when the stimulation is removed, motivation collapses because the task alone no longer carries enough drive. High performers avoid this. They keep the work environment relatively clean and let the task generate the reward through completion, not through extras layered on top. Finally, recovery plays a huge role in maintaining motivation. Dopamine is not infinite. It needs periods of low stimulation, quiet, rest, sleep to rebuild its baseline. When your baseline is healthy, effort feels possible. When it's depleted, even simple tasks feel overwhelming. This is why someone can regain motivation after a restful night or a peaceful day off. The system resets, and effort becomes attractive again. Shaping motivation is ultimately about managing the timing of reward, not waiting for motivation to magically appear. When you reward effort, celebrate progress, avoid cheap dopamine, and protect recovery, you build a brain that seeks challenge instead of resisting it. You train yourself not just to work harder, but to want the work. And that shift, where effort becomes rewarding, is the foundation of lasting motivation and consistent high performance. Your internal state, your level of alertness, calmness, focus, or agitation is not random. It's governed by a set of physiological mechanisms you can influence within seconds. Most people assume their state is driven purely by thoughts or emotions, but the opposite is true. Thoughts follow physiology. If you learn to shift your breathing, posture, muscle activation, or exposure to temperature, you gain the ability to steer your mental state almost on command. This isn't abstract theory. It's how the nervous system has worked for millions of years, long before conscious language or reflective thought existed. The autonomic nervous system is the master regulator here. It has two major branches: the sympathetic branch, responsible for mobilization and action, and the parasympathetic branch, responsible for calm, recovery, and re-centering. People often think of these systems like a simple on-off switch, but they're more like a dimmer dial, always adjusting, always calibrating. Physiology is the fastest way to turn that dial because it interfaces directly with the neural circuits that control state. Breathing is the most direct tool because it connects the body's mechanical processes to the brain's emotional centers. A long exhale immediately activates the parasympathetic system. That's why a single deep sigh can reduce stress in moments. The physiological sigh, 2 quick inhales through the nose followed by a long, complete exhale, is one of the fastest ways known to lower stress and restore control. It's not placebo. The second inhale reinflates collapsed air sacs in the lungs, increasing oxygen absorption, and the long exhale triggers a neural reflex that reduces heart rate. Within 30 seconds of repeating this pattern, the heartbeat slows, the mind clears, and the nervous system resets. If you need the opposite effect, alertness, readiness, cognitive sharpness, the breath can take you there too. Faster, more deliberate inhales signal the sympathetic system to elevate arousal. This isn't just about breathing faster, it's about controlled, rhythmic inhales with slightly shorter exhales. This pattern increases noradrenaline release in the brain and heightens attention. It's a tool you can use before a presentation, a workout, a study session, or any moment where you need to transition into a more focused state. Posture and muscle tension are another pathway into state control. When the body is slouched, breathing is restricted, lung capacity shrinks, and the brain receives signals consistent with low energy or anxiety. Simply opening the chest, lifting the sternum, and relaxing the shoulders changes the type of sensory information sent to the brain. This shift activates regions associated with alertness and stability. Even slight contractions of large muscle groups, like gripping a surface, stabilizing the core, or generating brief tension in the legs, can increase autonomic activation and bring the mind into a more present, attentive mode. Movement is one of the most reliable ways to shift state because it directly influences catecholamines, chemicals associated with alertness, motivation, and readiness. A 30-second burst of fast-paced movement can pull you out of mental stagnation far more effectively than caffeine or mental force. Even a brisk walk resets the autonomic balance, increases blood flow to the brain, and provides a predictable rise in energy. The nervous system evolved to lean on movement as a state shifter. When you move, but the brain interprets it as action, and action primes focus. Temperature is another powerful lever, especially cold exposure. Cold triggers a rapid release of adrenaline, elevates alertness, and increases mood-related neurochemicals. A brief cold shower, a splash of cold water to the face, or exposure to cold air activates receptors in the skin that immediately shift the autonomic balance. The effect is not just psychological. Cold induces a real biochemical surge that sharpens cognition and elevates energy. Conversely, warmth encourages parasympathetic activation, helping the body and mind downshift. Vision is also tied deeply to state. When you narrow your visual field, focusing intensely on one spot, you activate circuits associated with drive and concentration. This is why deep focus feels visually tight. When you want to relax, allowing your vision to expand, taking in the periphery, signals safety to the brain and shifts you toward calmness. It's a built-in biological mechanism, tunnel vision for effort, panoramic vision for recovery. All these tools share the same principle: state drives performance and physiology drives state. When you learn to manipulate breath, movement, vision, temperature, and posture, you're no longer at the mercy of whatever emotion or thought happens to arise. You can shift yourself into focus when you need focus, into calm when you need calm, and into readiness when you need readiness. This ability to change your internal state quickly and deliberately is one of the most practical forms of self-regulation. It's not about suppressing emotions or forcing discipline. It's about using the body to guide the brain into the mode that matches your goals. Once you master these tools, controlling your state becomes a skill you can access at any time, under any conditions, and in any environment. You were given a roadmap, not a secret pill. But the real leverage: light, timing, breath, movement, and reward. Those 5 inputs are what separate habitual high performers from near misses. If you start with morning light and movement, structure your day around biological rhythms, and use quick physiological switches before high-stakes moments, you will change how your brain shows up and how your work gets done. Do this consistently for a few weeks, and you'll notice the difference: clearer mornings, longer stretches of deep work, faster learning, and better recovery. That's the real brain hack. Not shortcuts, but smart sculpting of your internal environment.